Generation American wants to enlighten your mind to everyday life as a first gen in today's America. There is a perception in today's society, and Oscar is going to dive in and dissect the reality of being a first gen. Join Oscar and his guests from all walks of life, discussing their trial and tribulations in today's America. Now, your host, Oscar Villacis.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of First Gen American. I'm your host, Oscar Villacis. Right here, I'm currently in our First Gen Multimedia studios, but we're broadcasting live out of WSMN 95.3 FM and 1590 AM. Also, a quick shout out to our sponsors, Boomer Graphics and Signs. Boomer Graphics and Signs located out of um, Boomer Graphics and Signs located out of Nashua, New Hampshire, and also our sponsor Rivera Nayarit. Rivera Nayarit, located right here in 116 West Pearl Street in Manchester, New Hampshire, in Nashua, New Hampshire, and also Mijalisco in Manchester, New Hampshire. Um, when in doubt, when you're doing live radio, ladies and gentlemen, there's always some technical difficulty. And I feel like I'm frozen. Am I frozen? Nope. I'm
No.
moving. No. All right. All right. Um, Anyways, I would love to give a special shout out also to our new sponsor alert, Fences Unlimited. Fences Unlimited, fabricating and installing fences for over 40 years now. If you want to be able to join the team, reach out, Alan, at fencesunlimited.com for your employment today. And also, a special welcome to today's guest, uh, Victoria Banuelos. I'm so sorry. I butcher. I butcher. I knew
All
I was
good.
gonna
Banuelos.
Banuelos. Every time I get a little nervous, people say, "Oh yeah, you've been doing this for almost 2 years now," but I always get nervous. I don't. It's the
I'm
jitters,
nervous too. We'll be nervous
No,
together.
well, I Banuelos, Victoria Banuelos, designer and also creating marketing strategies for cultural diverse brands, which is awesome. I can't wait to hear about that. Also, you're an author. You have your own book of First Gen, Next Gen. I'm excited to read about that book as well. And welcome to the show. Tell us a little bit about you and where you're currently living right now.
Yeah, thanks so much for the invite. Yeah, so I am currently living in LA, born and raised in LA. I grew up in a city called Montebello, which is about 10 miles from downtown, and it's a few miles from East LA, which is quite a diverse area. Have a heavy immigrant community. Majority of the people residing in my direct community were of Hispanic and Asian descent, and a lot of us were first gens. So I was surrounded by first gens growing up. And then, yeah, I mean, for family, I guess a little bit about my like upbringing and my childhood. I'm an only child. I am the only daughter of Mexican immigrants. My dad is
Wow.
from Zacatecas. My mom is from Colima. And
Okay.
yeah, and growing up too, because I grew up in such a diverse community, I was heavily influenced by both the Asian people in my community and Hispanic people in my community. So a lot of us had same cultures and values. Many of my friends, whether they were Asian or Hispanic, we all kind of had that first gen experience.
Tell me, what motivated you to start the strategic content creating and marketing for first generation Americans?
Yeah, so it kind of happened gradually. I've been a marketer for a little over a decade now, and I've worked in a variety of sectors, both the public sector and the private sector. I've worked for a design firm. I've worked for local and federal government. So just not related to like diversity, equity, inclusion, or the first gen
Mhm.
experience at all. But I did do volunteering with high school students and college students that were primarily Black and Brown students. And through that, I kind of I merged my passion for marketing and for helping my community. And that's kind of how that journey started. And, you know, when I started the book, I didn't set out to write a book at all. I was just trying to look for a resource that could help the students on their path through college, through their first 5 years of their career, and that's kind of how the book started developing. So it took me about a year to write the book, but it's really been like a 5 to 7 year journey to create it.
You know, and living in LA and East LA, the diversity and the culture, completely different dynamics in, from the East Coast of living and growing up. I mean, I was born and raised in New York, in Brooklyn, and moved to New Hampshire. It would be kind of like you moving to Seattle. Not as much diversity, but more so than here in New Hampshire. Tell me some of the struggles, if any, of how it was growing up, or maybe not. Because there's a lot of the presence of the Mexican culture is alive and well in LA. We've noticed for decades now. But going into a corporate industry and working in the private sector, what were some of the struggles as a first generation for you?
You know, I'm so glad you said that because it's so true. I've been asked the question before, like, what are your struggles as a first gen growing up? And the truth
Mhm.
is that I never felt like I stuck out because I was part of the majority at the time.
Right.
And maybe I was just naive, maybe I was just not self aware, but because most of the people around me were not a minority and part of
Hmm.
or they were a minority and part of an underrepresented group and therefore the majority. I had the freedom to develop my identity how I wanted with the values I wanted. And
Yeah.
it was just never a question for me. It was never something that was in my mind. And like you said, it wasn't until I entered this corporate sector where I received that culture shock. Because even through college, I always sought out diverse groups and friends and things.
Right.
So it wasn't like I was completely unaware of microaggressions and racism or anything like
Right.
that. But um, when I entered especially corporate America in that space, that was really when I became aware of it. And one of the things that I talk about in my book is just this feeling of like I don't even know how to explain it. Like it was just you work so hard for your entire life. You have this idea of what entering the workplace is gonna be like, and then once you actually do it, it's just like everything falls apart. And so I mean, it took me some time to get used to it. I felt like I was way behind everyone else in the workplace because I didn't really know anyone who had worked in an office up until that point or had like a white collar job and I hadn't developed my network to the point where I had people to ask. And I feel like a lot of that feeling is what I wanted to put into this resource that I created for other people because you just feel very alone. And that's all that's
Yeah.
really the one feeling that stuck out to me, just like
Mhm.
feeling alone and not knowing who to turn to.
That's something that we talk about all the time here. It's about that swinging pendulum, right? You're progressing and moving forward. You're striving to propel the family forward, but not out of touch just enough to stay relevant to the culture and not feel like you're isolating yourself to wanting to do better, because now you're leaving your family members, not leaving them behind, but and you're evolving in a sense where now they can't talk to you about your new strives because they can't relate as a first gen, right? Have you felt that?
Hmm.
Doing everything that you've been doing, your upbringing, we have the support of our family, of our parents saying, we want you to do better. We want you to get a better education. We want you to get a good job. We want you to get a career. We come from Our backgrounds come from factories, essential workers. And now here you are, you're an author. You are a designer. You're an amazing human being that is moving forward. Have you felt that disconnect?
Yeah, to some degree I have, and it's strange because on one hand, like you said, like your family supports you through all of this, and that support is it's part of our first gen community. It's part of like the
Tremendous.
Latinx community. It's just like that
Right.
family support that you just have throughout this journey. Um, but I also think that like if I had to encapsulate this feeling in another word, it's like this weird guilt that you feel almost.
Right.
Because I feel like,
Mm-hmm.
right, it's like first gen
Right.
guilt is a very real thing, and I've heard that from a lot of other first gens too, where
Mm-hmm.
it takes a lot of shapes and forms throughout the year depending on what life stage you're in. In high
Mm-hmm.
school and middle school, I remember my dad waking up at 4 a.m. He had a job that like a manual labor job, and just seeing how tired he was sometimes a lot of the time when he was coming home, knowing my parents were my age when they immigrated here, and feeling that guilt of like, I'm stressed out because I have a bio test on Thursday, and here are my parents like immigrating to another country at my age and having to learn a whole new language, and like, what do I have to complain about? And then,
Mm-hmm.
and same thing in college too, with the financial sacrifices my parents were making. There was no room to complain, there was no room to fail. And going back to your point about the disconnect, it almost feels like you you feel like you have it easy, so there shouldn't be any room to complain. So there
Mm-hmm.
is that disconnect of like, you can't really relate to their struggles, but you still feel like you're struggling, and you're like, what's wrong with
Mm-hmm.
me that I can't keep up? And same thing as an adult too, like I working a white collar job with benefits, and like on paper it all looks really great.
What's
But
benefits?
or like, your benefits,
No, no,
healthcare,
I know.
insurance, all
I
of
know.
that stuff.
I
Yeah.
know. I
Oh,
know.
but yeah, exactly. Yes.
Yeah,
I,
you know.
yeah, like what are benefits? What what
Yeah,
what is
what's benefits?
financial stability? Like what?
Yeah. No.
But
Yeah.
like you're supposed to be grateful for all of these things, and there's like no
Right.
room to to fail, essentially.
Right. Tell me a little bit about your upbringing. What do you remember growing up? We remember the struggles. That guilt, of like
Mhm.
that motivation growing up is like if I'm not doing good in school, then I'm not able to get a good job or get a good education to get a good job to be able to come back and take my family out of poverty, right? What are some of
Mhm.
the what are some of the not the lessons, but kind of the conversations that you had with your parents of maybe, because expectations were automatically set before we were even born. Like
Mhm.
you can just imagine your mom rubbing her belly and saying, "This is our future. This is what it's all worth. This is what it's all worth. It's right here. We're creating life, and this life has a better opportunity for us." What was those conversations like, and what resonated with you thus far?
It's interesting because, and this might be like a bigger conversation too, but I feel like even within our first gen community, there is a lot of nuance in our experiences, because I think,
Mm,
for example, yes, I grew up with two parents who were working. My mom had to work mornings. She'd come home, pick me up from school, say hello, cook dinner, and then she had to go to her job at night.
right.
My dad, as I mentioned, wake up very early to go to his job. So that was one aspect of it. But then the other aspect is that, I also feel like I had a certain level of privilege growing up because my mom was a teacher. And
Yeah.
she always emphasized like the education's the backbone of your progress. And I didn't grow up rich by any means, but I
Mm,
know my parents did what they could to ensure that I was doing well in school, and that was my one thing to worry about. And they were never the type of parents who would like put pressure on me to like get straight A's, or like
mhm.
or I don't know, like I didn't have to tie my self-worth to my accomplishments, but that was a
Right.
type of pressure that I would put on myself,
Yes.
because even though they didn't say it, I would see my parents waking up early in the
Exactly.
morning and having to do all of these things. So I think for a lot of first gens who maybe don't have the parents that like put that pressure on you, it's still a
Mm,
subconscious thing that you're kind of dealing with. Um, and so those conversations with my parents were, I guess, non-existent, but it was just kind of implied.
mhm.
Um, so yeah, I mean, it wasn't very easy emotionally or financially, but my path to get to where I am was very much facilitated by my upbringing. And I think a lot of times too, um, you'll hear people say like, oh, like this Latino or Latina was able to go get their master's degree. Like, why can't you? And it's like, we don't all
Right.
have the same upbringing. We all may be first gens, but everyone has a very different experience. And that was mine. I always want to call that out because I have been used as that like token of like, you did well in school, like you got your master's, whatever. Like, yes, great. I'm proud of that. But I also had this huge support system behind me. And That's one of the other reasons why I wanted to create this book, because I wanted to like put what I know and collect what other people know, and give that to students that may not have that exact same support system that I did.
Right. You brought up a really good topic. Tokenism, and
Hmm.
we always think within our community, we always think that tokenism is from the white community tokenizing us. But something that you brought up that's really important to highlight is that we tokenize ourselves as well, especially with
Yes.
comparisons from other individuals, other our parents, from other, cousins or individuals, like, well, so and so is doing it, why can't you? And what about the neighbor that's doing it, Juanita's daughter, she's doing it, and maybe
I feel
there's
like I
an
hate
out.
Juanita.
But at the same time, you're saying to yourself, well, you're too proud to go ask because you're already compared. So that stigma of that competitiveness to somebody that doesn't even know that they're competing with you, and that and instead of aligning and saying, hey, this person is doing it and I know you can do it, just the verbiage, just a little tweaking. Hey, this person is doing it, I know that you can do it, why don't we go together and go ask them how they're doing it so that maybe you can align with them? No, it's an
Mhm.
automatic competition. We're off to the
Yes.
races. Everybody wants the white picket fence, the big house, the white picket fence. This is what we came here for. What are you doing? Are you doing your part? If you're not paying the bills, then at least are you getting your education? Because you know what? As soon as you turn 18, you're out of here. You know,
Yep.
and that's another thing
Yeah.
that we need to talk about. That we need to talk about is multicultures, the acceptance within kids. Multicultures within the same living corridors and the same household, to be able to self-sustain and move forward as a community. The American lifestyle of how our parents are automatically like, hey, as soon as you turn 18, you got to go. But when we go back home, when we go to Mexico or South America, you see your cousins' kids, your grandparents, your great grandparents, all living in one community, striving to work together. I think we forget those roots and that essence. Tell me some of the essence and the
Totally.
roots that are you still connecting with, that you still want to keep alive, even though because we don't tend to forget, we tend to implement and better. How are you moving those memories forward for your family?
Yeah, so I think, I mean, there are so many core values that our community has that you can integrate into your professional life, your personal life, and I feel like have helped me throughout my life.
Yeah,
And I mean, community, humility, humildad,
mm, big.
just it's because I wrote this too. So many thoughts, so many thoughts.
Yeah,
But I think that a lot of these values sometimes, like, they have a time and a place. And when you're talking about the workplace, like, it's hard because, like, take humildad for example. Like, I grew
right,
up where you always kind of have to put your head down, work hard, be humble, and just you know keep it that way. Like that, those are the people que tienen educación.
right,
But if you work hard, keep your head down, if you're humble at work, like, no one's going to pay attention to you. You're not going to be that
right.
person getting those raises. So,
Exactly.
as a first gen, you kind of have to know when and where to implement those values. But I think as a person, like, community has always been really important to me. And it's something that I've never really tapped into until I started on this project because, um, as you were saying, like, talking about that weird, like, yes, everyone's in a community, everyone works together, we collaborate, but at the same time there's this feeling of isolation where if something goes
Yes.
wrong, like, you keep it in your family. Like, God
Hmm.
forbid you go and tell someone, like, oh my God, we're struggling. Like, that's just not
Hmm.
done. um we don't talk about Bruno and Canto style, like, so real.
Exactly. Right.
So, um, yeah, I mean, there's just like this dichotomy that you have to balance as a first gen. Is this the place to be humble? Is it not the place to be humble? Which values help me? Which values don't? But ultimately, I do feel like if I had to pick the ones that have helped me the most, it's that feeling of community by far. Because
Right.
after growing up, like I said, is a very Hispanic but also very Asian community, and most of my network growing up was Asian because
Right.
those were the friends I had, and in college too. And once I started writing this book and reaching out to other Latinx individuals and business leaders, entrepreneurs, that's really when I started connecting. And I was like, I should have plugged into this a really long time ago, because I felt support like I had never felt before, beyond
Yeah.
just my immediate family. So I think that's super important.
How do you, with doing it all, how have you balanced with, we live, and this is something that we don't really talk about, is mental health. You know,
Mhm.
we are in the position of, sometimes we're dealing with all this anxiety, the stress of maybe potentially failure.
Mhm.
And for us, failure is a no-go. I think that's, as first generations, that's one of our most top level anxieties, right? Is failure. But I think for me, what I've learned throughout the way is, failure, to embrace it, because that's just another lesson of how to do it better the next time and retry. Have you battled with, anxiety or mental health in throughout your venture, and how did you deal with it?
Oh yeah, yes, yes. I am a very anxious person, and therapy has helped me a lot, which is also something that I
Mm,
think people don't talk about. One of the people
right.
I featured was Brandy Carlos, who's the creator of Therapy for Latinx, because I feel like there's no way you can be a successful individual personally or professionally without having a hold on your mental health and keeping that in
Right.
check. So therapy has helped a lot. But growing up, I was a very anxious person. Like I was
Mm,
like in elementary school when I was having panic attacks. Like I always put a lot
wow.
of pressure on myself. And I think externally, I was always perceived as a high achiever, but internally, like throughout the years, it just things got worse and worse until I finally went to therapy. And now it's like, okay, now I have a handle on it. But
Right.
I think we can't emphasize the importance of mental health enough, and especially within our Latinx community, it's so
Mhm.
important to talk about and be very open about, because it's just something that isn't done enough.
Right.
Um, and yeah, I mean, when we talk about balancing it all, like it's not possible. I think rest is very important. Like you said, failure is just a natural part of life. And I think as first gens, when we think of failure, like for us, the price feels very high. You fail
Mhm.
your family, you're not just failing yourself, you're failing your community, you're failing your family, you're failing all of these people. But at the end of the day, it's important to realize that, like, that's just part of it. And we all have those failures, and it's just because people don't talk about it doesn't mean they don't exist. Like now with social
Right.
media, it's like always all the highlights, and that's all people really
Mhm.
talk about. But um, that's not the reality.
You know what? I every time I hear first gen, I myself am in therapy. Every time I hear first generation Americans say I'm in therapy and take that and say it with pride and saying that I'm breaking this barrier, I'm breaking these chain reactions for the next generations to come, I commend you. Truly,
Well,
because
likewise.
that, thank you. And that's just telling us, because that's another thing that's shunned upon. It's like, wait a minute, you're not feeling bad. Eso no es ansiedad. Eso es inquietud. That's
Mhm.
not that's not anxiety. That's just that's just jitters. That's not anxiety.
Just
That's just jitters. Just focus on what you got to do. I don't have the luxury of saying, "Oh, I don't feel good today. I can't go to work." You know why? Because then you won't eat, and we can't pay the bills, and we don't have a roof over our heads. Right?
exactly.
The luxury of what our parents thought it was just as easy for us. But this is another level of how we're moving forward. How did you overcome that and decide to write a book? And tell us a little bit about that book.
um gosh, I think that that's a complicated answer. I I mean, there were a lot of moments, I think, that made me want to write a book. I don't know why this one's popping into my head, but I guess I'll just talk about that.
Sure.
So yeah, I mean, I remember like one of my first jobs, it was when I was little, like I would always picture myself like working in downtown, going into my like big fancy office building and like being all
Right.
dressed up. Like that's what I envisioned. Everyone has like
Right.
their goals of what they want to be. when they grew up, I wanted to be someone who worked in an office and had a fancy building. And so I did.
Mhm.
That's one of the jobs I had.
Yeah.
And I remember one night we were staying really late. I don't know, we were working on some project with my team, and it was it was late enough to where the cleaning crew came in, and we had many late nights. The cleaning crew would come in. I live in LA. Most of the cleaning crew was Hispanic, Spanish speaking, probably Latinas, you know. And I remember how dismissive my coworkers were of this cleaning crew, and we had been
Mm.
eating throughout the evening, and they just kind of like left the dishes in the sink, didn't even make eye contact with them, didn't say hello. And I mean, I did what my parents taught me, like usually, like buenas tardes, señoras, cómo están, like whatever.
Yeah,
I mean, it was
absolutely.
a very small exchange. It was nothing major. But like that was one of the moments where I felt like there was a difference between myself as a
Right.
first gen and among many moments, like myself in first gen and other people that I was working with. And um and I don't know, like it was just like a compilation of all of those little moments that made me feel different. But also when I talked to other first gens, like we kind of shared that same experience
Yeah.
that made me want to put all of these experiences into one place.
Mm.
So going back to like how I started this book and what's it about, I really wanted to examine the workplace as a first gen individual, not just as Hispanic, because we're always grouped into a monolithic massive people, but just kind of understand our approach to work. So um, the book is divided into three parts. The first part is how we got here, where I kind of talk about why I use the term Latinx, which is always like a hot button topic. It's like, no, it's
Yeah.
Latino, Latina. I prefer Latinx because that is just how I view inclusion.
Mhm.
I talk about this fallacy of échale ganas, which explains why hard work is not enough for first gens to kind of accelerate their leadership potential. And then
Mhm.
just all of those cultural factors that shape the way that we view the workplace and kind of encapsulate all of the experiences that I had, being a non-white member in a white collar environment. And then part two goes into the principles of accelerance, which is what I call the different skills and the different elements that make up those first 5 years of your career that will really accelerate your potential. Because I think that one of the biggest things that kind of plagues first gen individuals in those first 5 years of their career is underemployment. A lot of us will
Mm.
graduate from college or trade school or whatever, and we'll just kind of take the first job that comes our way because, like, thank God you have a job, right? A paying job. When in reality, if you take a job that is that isn't paying you your worth initially, that
Mhm.
cycle just continues and you are 5 times less likely to kind of reach your full potential. They did some study where it was like you were 5 times less likely to get to that your desired salary if you started off as an underemployed individual. So I really wanted to look at the things that accelerate your career to kind of examine what your individual skills are to do that, and then how to use them. And then lastly, I did talk about how there are other factors that kind of influence your professional career outside of the workplace, and mental health is the number one thing that we
Mm.
kind of ignore, but that's huge. Um, so yeah, I mean, and in that, it wasn't just like Victoria's experience. This is not a an autobiography. Like, I wanted to talk to other individuals who had 10, 20, 30, 40 years working in corporate America and kind of get
Mm.
their perspective. So we talked
Mm.
about code switching, building social capital, finding your campeones in the workplace, not just finding your
Mm.
mentors, but people who will actually advocate for you and champion for you.
Right.
Um, and that's really what the book is about.
That's amazing. That's our Bible, I guess. I can't wait to read it. No, because truly you hit
I'll send you a
every
copy.
single. Thank you. I appreciate that because every single topic that you hit is important. And one that I've recently learned throughout the year, this venture with the show and this podcast is um, the code switching part. Which when I talk to other first geners out there, they're like, "What's code switching?" And then you would
Hmm.
consider it as your customer service voice. But for the
Hmm.
listeners that really don't know, and most of us, are still learning, what is code switching?
Code switching, it depends what context you're in and what environment you're in, but I guess in a nutshell, I would define code switching as having to change the way you present yourself to fit your context, in a way that will help you reach your goals, get you what you want. Basically, you know, some people say it's like talking white, acting white. It
Mhm.
depends on who you ask. But what I define code switching as like having to change your personality to fit the context that you're in. And in theory, you have a lot of workplaces, especially now with the Great Resignation, everyone's leaving
Mhm.
because they are just not happy where they're working. You have a lot of workplaces that are promoting this idea of bring your whole self to work, and we encourage all of our employees to be their authentic selves. When in reality, like, if you don't code switch, you're kind of seen as the other, and then that just like that there goes your ability to be promoted. But yeah, I mean, that's how I would define code switching, having to change yourself to fit a context.
I thank you for sharing that, because I was reflecting on when exactly did I start code switching. And when I moved up here from New York, from Brooklyn, I had a difficult time adapting to this community, to the city. Going from going from somewhere like Los Angeles or New York City, where there's a melting pot of different cultures and diversity, and your neighbors, who you go to school with, to being less than 2%, right?
Yeah.
And trying so hard to fit in, but doing an amazing job sticking out, right? And I grew up in the court system. I was, I got arrested as a juvenile, um, for criminal mischief when I was younger, getting into fights because I was bullied. And when I got wrapped into the court system, that's when I knew code switching. Because and I was
Mhm.
telling this to a fellow, a radio host, previously, because she was asking about code switching. And I told her,
Mhm.
I noticed code switching and how I implemented it into my life when I noticed that kids from my community would go up to the judge, and they were around their attorneys and guardian ad litems and the prosecutors, and they were just so frustrated of being in the court system that they would give up on themselves and kind of just lash out of anger, fear, etc. Right? And I
Mhm.
noticed that constantly every single individual that would go on wouldn't notice. I would notice that there was the same pattern. They would just get stuck in the system. I myself thought about doing something different. What would work? What's the approach? So I would talk to the prosecutor and the lawyer and the judge like they would talk to each other.
Mhm.
And I would come up to them, and I would talk to them with purpose of like dialogue and negotiating. Your Honor, I know that me not doing so good in school might seem a way of, you know, putting me at risk to go back home, because then you feel like you guys don't have a hold on me, and I would lose interest, and I would not give up on myself like you feel like I have. That right there, what I just did, that was a code switch, you know? And I noticed it throughout my career in corporate America, being able to kind of adapt, like, because as first generation Americans, we're chameleons. We're adapting to our environment, not because we are whitewashed or maybe going about it as like you're forgetting your roots. No, that's a survival mechanism. That's a survival mechanism, because I've been in corporate situations where if I'm too Hispanic to my own coworkers, which are Latinos, right? Then
Mhm.
automatically I would be unapproachable and intimidating of like, hey, what are you guys saying about us? We don't understand. You know what I'm saying? And now approaching them into a whole dynamic where they feel comfortable. And we've always had to do that all of our lives, to approach to the white individual to make them feel at ease when our
Mhm.
anxiety is off the roof.
Yes,
If it can we
absolutely.
am I gonna get that position that I'm going for? Am I gonna isolate the other leaders around leadership to the point where now they're looking at me because I bring a new perspective and a new light and a new culture, and now I'm including that diversity because I am that community. You
Mm-hmm.
know, that is the struggle that we deal with daily. So for people that say code switching, you're even in our community, we're victims of that in our community. Ah, look at him. He's not. He's. We've lost him. He likes that. He likes that white rice. Light on the salt, please.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So tell me on some aspects of like, how did you get to where you got in life, and was that a big factor?
Yeah, I mean, what a story. And it is absolutely a protective mechanism. Yeah, like it's so true. And I guess for me, code switching was just so subconscious that, and it happened so fluidly that
Right.
I wasn't even aware of it. And it gets to the point where, I was saying how like growing up, I had the ability to just kind of shape my identity in whatever direction I wanted, but then you kind of lose yourself in that. You're like, I've been
Right.
code switching for so long in corporate America. Is this just who I am now?
Exactly.
And I've been in corporate America for a little over 10 years. And just now that I'm kind of working for myself, I started my own business, that I'm kind of waking up from that.
Yeah.
So I guess my answer to your question is I don't know yet. I've been doing this for so long. I don't even know if, I'm sure it was a factor
Mm.
to get me to where I am, but I want to unlearn that. And even it starts even way earlier than that in the school system. You start code switching because the school system is based on
Right.
a non-decolonized mentality.
Right.
So you learn that just naturally. And then you just start applying that to different situations to your benefit, but not realizing that there shouldn't be a need to do that, you know?
Yeah.
So I think when we're having these like diversity, equity, and inclusion conversations, that's part of
Mm.
it, like eliminating just the need for code switching in general,
Absolutely.
because it takes all of us to do that. Like we really have to dismantle that system.
Mhm.
So.
What do you say to the individuals that are feeling that identity crisis, that are feeling the back blow from their families, and saying, "Oh wow, mírala, una creída, un creído," that they're too good for us now, and
Mhm.
and you're like, well, just for some reason we just found somebody that qualified a little bit more than you, and we appreciate you. But hey, we'll keep your resume on file. We'll keep you in our thoughts for the future if anything were to open up, right? What do you tell those individuals that are constantly, because we talk about again that swinging pendulum, but that could
Mhm.
be just like a constant emotional roller coaster at that.
It is. It really is. And I think that the best way to fight back against that is truly just taking a beat and thinking about who you are, and then just like not thinking about having to
Mhm.
change that.
Right.
Because the best way we can fight against that is truly just bringing your most authentic self to work, being really
Mm.
open about who you are, what your beliefs and what your values are in, and stopping the feeling of like having to change yourself just to make someone else feel comfortable, whether it's your family or in the workplace. Because I mean, the more you do that, it's gonna the pendulum will continue to swing, and
Right.
and we have to, at some point the buck's got to stop. So I think that now by 2040, the majority of people in the United States are going to be Latino. As of 2020, the majority of workers who had entered the workplace are Latinx. So I mean, just power in numbers at this point. If there is this kind of
Absolutely.
collective feeling, this collective mentality of like, no, we're not going to take it anymore. Like we're going to be who we are in the workplace. And
Mhm.
it's scary. Like it's very easy to say, and it's very idealistic to say, like, just be who you are, and like that's fine.
Right.
I know I'm like not on my soapbox. I know how hard it is.
Yeah.
But sometimes, all it takes is one day where you speak up in a meeting and say, like, yeah, like not okay with that. Why don't we try XYZ? Or if someone in your family is like, okay, yeah, ya viene la creída, la muy muy.
Yeah.
Just be like,
Yeah.
hey, haha, but also like, I really don't like it when you say that.
Right.
So it's something that takes time. It who knows how long it will take, but it has to start somewhere, and we all have a collective responsibility to stop that.
Right. How do we prevent ourselves from getting taken advantage at the same time? Because we see a lot of we see these major corporations, these major brands, as diversity and inclusion, Black History Month. Let's get you a section. Hispanic Heritage Month right around the corner. Let's
Hmm.
let's go in and support. Let's support Oscar's business. Let's support Victoria
But
and her
only for 30
business.
days.
Exactly. So how do we protect ourselves? Because now we're noticing, companies are noticing, especially in the white community, companies are noticing we need to reach out to this community. This is an untapped market. And believe it or not, this community of the Latino community, they're consumers as well.
Hmm.
And we have to approach them with feeling and emotion, because they're passionate individuals. How do we protect ourselves from that?
I think awareness is the first step, and that comes from experience, and going back to the community thing. Like, I do feel like as a millennial, I have a responsibility to, like, the younger generations, Gen Z generations that come after, to give them that heads up, and to kind of teach them what I know. And that's where the responsibility of being a first gen kind of comes in. Like, we are setting the pace for the generations that come after us. And it's not always easy. It doesn't always feel fair when you're kind of struggling to figure it out on your own, when you're the trailblazer, when you're the first in your family to go to
Right.
college. But that was the hand that we were dealt. And I do feel like we have a responsibility to the younger generations to kind of pave that way and help them not get taken advantage of. But in our case, like, it really does come with experience. Sometimes you just have to know when to pick up on that BS, and also not undervalue yourselves, because companies need us.
Mm,
When we're talking
absolutely.
about diversity, equity, inclusion, a lot of companies perceive it as like a charity thing that they're doing, and it's
Yeah.
not. If you truly care about your bottom
Yeah.
line, if you truly care about your student body, and
Mm,
maximizing your profit, whatever, like, you need a diverse employee base. That's just a
right.
fact.
Right.
So it's kind of, I think the tides are turning, and companies are starting to realize that. And maybe we have many years ahead of us where the tide needs to continue to turn, but it's already starting, and it's more of like, they need us more than we need them,
Right.
honestly, like, at this point. So when you go in for a salary negotiation, don't undervalue yourself. Don't let yourself get taken advantage of. Yay for Hispanic Heritage Month, but your loyalty should be to yourself, what you want, what your career path is, and that's really where it starts.
Mm, yeah. And strategically, how these companies market it is like, let's give them the front line. Let's actually give them the mic to be able to speak, instead of
Hmm.
speaking for them, but only for 30 days.
Hmm.
Throughout everything that we've talked about, you started a business. Tell me the beginnings of how that was, because you yourself, like you said, are a trailblazer. You're starting business, you're writing books, you're doing you were living in a comfortable life. The expectation, you over exceeded your parents' expectation. Your parents said, get a good job, get a good career with good benefits, and get stable. You
Hmm.
said, I'm stable, but I'd rather do it on my own terms and help others. How was the beginning of all of that?
Yeah, I think a, a lot of us, like, don't know what we don't know. And our parents
Right.
always told us, like,
Say
get
that a
a good
lot.
job, the 9 to 5, that's the American dream. And that's what I thought the epitome of making it was, of success
Right.
was. But once I started talking to other people and networking with other people, I saw that there was this whole other world of making money, of being employed, that I hadn't experienced and I hadn't tapped into. So for the business, like, what I I've always wanted to start one, but I wasn't like, I'm going to start a business today.
Yeah.
um, I After the book was published late last year, I received a number of opportunities that I didn't previously have available to me, and it opened a lot of doors that allowed me to, like, merge my passion and my skills. And I wrote a whole chapter about it called Tus Dos Amores, because I feel like
Yes.
a lot of times, like, we talk about, it's such a cliche, but we talk about passion and like following your passion, but you can't make a living because that's a luxury.
Right. Yeah.
It should always be like a side hustle or a hobby.
Right.
But
Ugh.
I want first gens to realize, if like there was one takeaway, and what I've learned in the process of starting my business is that I didn't know how to pursue my passion, and because of that I failed to pursue it.
Mm.
And there is this Harvard professor that did a study, and he said that like his research suggests that there are three things that people forget when it comes to passion. And the first is that passion isn't something that you find, rather it's something that's developed. And for me, my passion was developed over the course of 10 years. It was marketing. I knew it was something I was good at, but I didn't know if I could do it on my own. And it wasn't until I published the book where I was like, maybe this is something I can do. Let's try it
Mm.
out. And then the second thing is that it's challenging to pursue your passion, because over time it wanes. Like, you have that excitement, you're like, I'm gonna do this, and then you kind of have that creative dip where you're like, I don't know if I can do this. And it's in
Right.
that moment when you have that dip where you kind of determine, is this something I want to pursue long term, or is this just kind of a phase for me?
Yeah.
And so I would encourage all first gens to just give yourself a shot and realize that, like, even if you're working a 9 to 5 right now, even if it's not your dream job, like,
Yeah.
this is just one step in your very long career. The
Exactly.
important thing is just to keep moving
Mm.
forward, because you never know where it's going to take you. Um, yeah. So I mean, and then the third thing is that sometimes your passion can lead you astray, and
Yeah. Absolutely.
you have to recognize what the limits are.
Yeah, depending on where you want to take it. That's really well put. That's excellent. Um, and it's okay. A lot of us are, sometimes we get astray. We're chasing a check. Not of us. There's a difference. A lot of first generation Americans get confused with being self-employed and chasing a check, and being an entrepreneur and knowing the risk and the grit and the understanding of that creative dip. Because
Hmm.
once that creative dip happens, you call that reevaluation. Where am I?
Yes.
Where do I want to go? Is this even worth it? And then it's okay to step back, look at the whole picture, and then make a decision. But to live in that kind of uncertainty of like the unknown, but you're seeing that things are working and progressing, stick with it. There's a lot of grit that can't be taught.
Hmm.
That's internalized. You know, um,
Yes.
it's truly amazing what you're doing, and I'm glad that I was, you let us interview you in this honor of and just to see another first generation American, like, knowing that we're not alone in these stories that will keep coming to life with other amazing individuals like yourself, and the other guests that we get to interview, on how we're propelling forward, because our struggles, even though they're not parallel, side by side with the same storyline, we have different upbringings and we have different traditions, but the goal is still the same: to propel our culture and our family and our community forward. Now, first gen, next gen. I don't know if you have any children, um, but what would your child might listen to this at one point in the future in the archives. What's a message that you would tell the next generation to come?
I I would tell them that it's not their job just to survive, but it's their right to thrive. Because I
Mm.
think a lot of us, our families are in survival mode, and we kind of
Mm.
grew up with that, and we carry that on with us. But after a certain point, you have to realize that, like, if you went to college, if you have a financial stability, like, you're no longer in survival mode, and it's okay to enjoy what you do. It's okay to pursue things you like, and it's okay to not know what comes next. Still scary. Fear of the unknown is a very real thing, but
Mm.
um, the pressure that you're putting on yourself isn't is I guess it's no longer necessary if once you've like reached
Mm.
that point where you're like, I'm good. So
Yeah.
I would just like don't be so hard on yourself. I know it
Right.
sounds so
Right.
cliche, but I mean, I just see so many first gens falling into this trap of like hustle culture and keep going and keep pushing, and
Right.
sometimes you need to it, but it doesn't have to, you don't have to stay at that constant state of
Mm,
survival. Like it's okay to give yourself room to experiment. It's okay to give yourself room to thrive. And again, I know it sounds super idealistic, and for some people it's like, oh, I'm never going to get to that point. But
mm,
really it's a day at a time. It's a marathon, not a sprint.
mm.
And you owe it to yourself to just like enjoy what you're doing when it comes to work.
Right.
So that would be the advice that I would give them.
Well put. It's truly amazing. I felt like we were talking to ourselves at that moment too, because I think that the
Yo, yeah, me
stories,
too.
I think
This
that
is
those,
all just a projection. I learned that in therapy.
and I just, the world is our oyster, and we are the first ones. Like I hear with other generations, like this connection. My, how we forget. Business owners within my community. I'm fourth generation. I'm fifth generation in. But did you forget, or were you ever told about the struggles of the first generation of these your local business owners or your parents on how they first started? Because just because you have a platform now that's been running for a couple of decades or maybe a century doesn't mean that the struggles are not aligned. And as first generation, we're not speaking just for the Latin community. We're speaking for all first generations that are going through the same struggle. Um,
Mhm.
Thank you so much for joining me. Where can anybody find you? What's actually before we get into that, what's next for you and your business, and will we have another book?
Yeah, well, great question. Thank you, first of all, for the invitation again. I can't
Absolutely.
believe 55 minutes went by because this just flew by. Yeah, I don't know. I initially my plan was to go back to 9 to 5. I was kind of gonna promote the book and then go back, but the projects have
Mm,
kept on coming, and if they do, we'll see where this goes.
mm,
Like I said, this is really the first time that I've really had the chance to think about what my next play is going to be.
mm,
So yeah, hopefully we'll continue on with the business. It's called Puesto, in case anyone's interested.
mm. And where can
And
everybody
will
find
there
you
be
at?
an yeah, so my social media is underscore hello Victoria underscore on all channels. Um, and uh, will there be another book? I don't know. This one was it was pretty intense, that whole experience of writing it. So I might need to take a little break, but I'd love to kind of follow up and see maybe in another 10 years what I've learned and put together another next gen. So
Yeah, absolutely.
we'll see.
Truly amazing, and we appreciate you coming in and you know talking to us and sharing your experiences within the platform, because I think that these stories, people just kind of get conditioned into like the everyday life, and who can really be going through what I'm going through. And here we are, and we would love to set up a network coast to coast with first generation Americans and keep propelling these
Yeah, that'd
stories.
be
So
awesome.
we will stay connected on that part. As in, where can everybody buy your book? Where are you selling your book, on Amazon or?
Yeah, I mean, most major retailers, Amazon, Barnes and Noble. Um,
Perfect.
yeah, I mean, you can pretty much just Google it and you'll
Yeah,
find
and and
yellow
and
cover.
and please don't send me a copy, because I want to buy a copy. Like, if we're gonna support each other, we have to support each other the right way. We need to stop asking like, "Hey, you're first gen too. Can you help me out?"
Hook
We
it
need to
up.
have that. Well, can you hook me up? So we need to stay at that level. So I'm on my way to Barnes and Nobles, but thank you so much for being here, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank
This
you.
is First Gen American with an amazing guest and truly inspiring first generation American. Shout out to all of our sponsors, Boomer Graphics and Signs, Rivera Nayarit, and also Mi Jalisco if you're in town. And our new sponsor, Fences Unlimited. Reach them out at fencesunlimited.com to join their team today. Uh, Seasons are coming, and the work is booming. So they need to revamp their team. Thank you, everybody, and all of our listeners. First Gen American. I'm your host, Oscar Velasquez, and thank you so much, Victoria, for joining us.
WSMN
My
1590,
pleasure.
WSMN 95.3 FM.
I'll call you back, okay?
Listen, watch,
Okay.
and stream at WSMN.